So I mentioned initially that most mergers and acquisitions don't end up becoming successful. And usually as a result of that, when a bid is made, the price of the company that is buying usually falls. And the price of the company being purchased goes up because they're going to get money at a premium. And the reason is because a lot of mergers are made for, or acquisitions are made for bad reasons. So some of the bad reasons for mergers and acquisitions are, number one is to create a larger company. Okay, so it really doesn't matter if your company has 10,000 employees or 20,000. It's or the number of people or the locations. What you're trying to do is create an efficient, profitable company, and growing for that reason isn't good enough. The second one we talked about was diversification. If you are trying to grow to become a more diversified company, shareholders will punish you. So it's not a good idea to do that. And then the last one is just net income growth. And that is something that is more psychological. It just makes people feel that it's a larger company. It's got to be better for the shareholders. It's got more income, but not necessarily, because you got more shares that are being distributed. The real key is, were there any synergies, and did the synergies justify the price that you paid for them? So now let's look at we've talked essentially about friendly takeovers, but let's look at the process for a hostile takeover. And if you look at the steps, generally what somebody will do is they will acquire up to 10% of the shares quietly. Okay, so you don't tell somebody that you're buying the shares. You just start buying them in the public market. Once you make the announcement that, hey, I want to buy this company, share price will shoot up just because everyone expects you're going to pay a lot of money. So you get to 10%. At 10%, you have to make an announcement. Okay, so you must make an announcement, or you must, so the announcement just says that you own 10% of the company. And that is going to send the signal, share prices will go up. You can now continue to buy shares at the higher price, up to 20%. And once you get to 20%, you have to either do nothing else or make a tender offer. Okay, so you only make a tender offer to buy more. I guess if you didn't want to buy anymore and you're happy with 20, that would be fine too. But if you want to get all of the shares or the majority of the shares, you have to make an offer to everybody, to all shareholders. So you can't just, at this point, just start buying from specific blocks. Everyone has to have the same access. And the goal could be either 50% plus one share gives you a majority, and you can appoint the board, or you can get 67% for what's called a super majority. And some charters will require you to have that for certain things. And if you look at the defense tactics that the company being purchased can implement, here's a few common ones. Number one is they can spin off the asset that you might be interested in. So for example, if you're a shareholder of Apple and you are buying Apple, Apple has, I'll simplify it, say they've got their computers, the Macs, and you've got your iPhones. And if they really just want the iPhones, then what you would do is you would spin it off to the shareholders. And then at the end, what you have is this structure. So you have a shareholder that still owns shares of Apple, and Apple owns the MacBooks, and the shareholder now directly owns shares of a company called iPhone. So now it gets harder for them to purchase it, and they may sort of lose interest and just move on. And a carve-out is basically if you sold the iPhone to a third party. So instead of doing the spin-off, you sold it to some other company, and now you no longer own the iPhone division, and as a result of it, the company's less attractive. A couple of other defense tactics is you can change many of the decisions to supermajority. So instead of having 50%, you might force the person to take 67, and they may not want to do that. You could have a staggered board. An example is 1/3 changes every year. So if the person takes over the company today and only 1/3 changes, it'll take 3 years for them to get every member on the board that they want. Standstill agreement, and that one basically says negotiate to get the buyer to stop buying more shares. So they would stop at like 20%. Maybe you say, we'll give you a seat on the board and listen to some of what you say. A couple of other terms, crown jewels is just another term for what we discussed, where you sell the desirable assets. And there's a defense called the White Knight defense. And that's rarely going to work, but you could find a friendly buyer. And that person would bid more than the hostile buyer. And there's the last two, there's golden parachute and a poison pill. Yeah, golden parachute is where you get very large management payouts. So you could put a clause in saying that managers will get $100 million each if there's a hostile takeover. It's not very effective because then management wants the takeover to occur. And a poison pill is where you sell shares to everyone except the bidder at a very low price. And this is technically illegal, but companies will still try it, put it in place, and they basically hope that the buyer will lose interest and not want to go through the courts and walk away. The legal name, poison pill, is sort of the euphemistic name for the plan, but it's called a shareholder rights plan.